for dramatic purposes, I decided not to reveal her name for the Raven story. I don't know why I did that, but I kind of like it that way. That story is online, by the way, and if you Google around a little bit, you can see the ending. Everything turns out basically okay. I'm worried about Poppy. Well, at this point, I would like to initiate an awkward pause of around 30 seconds while I wait for people to come up with questions if they have any. And if you have one, please don't be shy. And if you don't have one, do your best to come up with one if you can. So let's just let it rise, feel the tension. Now I made it too much of a big deal. Yes?
Yeah, I don't usually like to go first, but
no one does.
We don't want to keep you feeling awkward. I just finished The Magicians this morning. It was so much fun. What a great, fun ride it was.
Thank you.
And as I was reading it, especially towards the end, and I don't want to give any good spoilers here in case folks haven't read to the end, but I was curious about whether it became, in my mind at least, the sort of last third quarter of the book felt very cinematic to me. And I just wondered, you know, the big fight scene at the end with the martial arts and all of that felt very cinematic. And I just wondered, when you were writing it, if you were thinking along those lines. And indeed, if this book has been optioned for film, it seems like it would be a great movie.
Well, thank you. I'm giving up on the microphone. I'm just going to let it wilt and I'll crouch over it. Well, it's funny. You know, I wasn't thinking in terms of, you know, let's write this so it'll be a great movie so somebody will option it. But, you know, film, I don't know any writers who don't, I mean, film and television have changed novels so much because, you know, I think a lot of writers, I would guess all writers now, really frame things in their mind. You know, the way that people do it in movies. And I certainly, you know, I would love to see that scene staged. There is, I can't really talk about it. I think the direction that we would go with this would probably not be a movie, but it would rather be television. You know, we're having, I'm learning very quickly about the world of Hollywood, and basically, you just have these interminable conversations. So we're having interminable conversations, which are sort of semi-serious with a few different people. I think it would be great to see it on a small or large screen. Structurally, I feel like, I began to feel like it was the plot was just, there was too much plot in it to be squished into 2 hours. It just isn't a natural fit. The plot is, or not the plot, but the structure is loosely based on Brideshead Revisited, which is an amazing book, which I put off reading until I was in my 30s because the title sounded so boring. And then I read it and it instantly became one of my all-time favorites. I borrowed a lot of that structure. Brideshead Revisited, the first half is set at Oxford, and the second half is set sort of in the world outside it. And you know, I went to see the movie of Brideshead Revisited that came out last year, and I thought it was terrible. And I remember loving the miniseries so much, and I suddenly realized it would be too hard to squish the book into 2 hours. The structure just isn't really a natural fit. But you know, it'd be cool to see it as like a high-end miniseries or something. No, I jinxed it. It won't happen. Yeah.
So wondering how the fact that you're a book critic may influence your writing and how your experience as a writer may be different because of that, someone who's not a book critic.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, you know, my whole career is kind of what ended up being kind of backwards. I always wanted to write fiction, and initially, you know, I went to grad school thinking about being an academic, and that didn't work out very well. And then I quit, and I got into reviewing books. You know, and after about 5 years, I ended up reviewing books for a time. So like my career as a critic kind of, it got big ahead of my career as a writer of fiction. So it became sort of backwards in a funny way. So a lot of people know me as a critic rather than a novelist. it's a huge, it's not, I want to say, oh, it's a trade-off, but it's not really a trade-off. It's a great, great thing to get to work as a critic while you're writing fiction, mainly because you see everything that's out there. And you know, when you're writing fiction, and I'm sure some of you in the audience writing fiction, you read other people and you watch what they're doing and you think that's interesting, or I wouldn't have done it that way, or I'm going to steal that and they'll never know, and so on and so forth. So it's so good to have the luxury of just looking at the landscape of what's out there people are doing. So it's, you know, it's a huge help. And also this funny thing about just having this internal critical voice. I've been reviewing for a time, for 8 years now, 9 years. I started in 2002, 9 years, I guess. So, you know, there's this like little sort of critical application that I can run in my head, and you know, I try to leave it off while I'm actually writing the first few drafts. But then later, if I'm trying to polish and figure out how things should actually go, I'll run the little critic app and say, you know, well, what do you think of this? And the critic app will say, oh, God, this is crap. So then I'll rewrite whatever it is, you know, according. So I think it's, you know, it's useful to see books the way reviewers